The billionaire came home unannounced and met his fiancée, doing the unimaginable to his paralyzed mother. But what he does next sends shock to everyone. Vincent came home 3 days early from his business trip to surprise his fiancée, but the sound greeting him wasn't laughter. It was his paralyzed mother's scream echoing through their $12 million Connecticut mansion.
Please, don't hurt me.
Racing to the medical suite, he found the woman he'd bought a 10-carat engagement ring for standing over his disabled mother, a walking stick raised high above her head. "She used my coffee mug," Amira snarled, her beautiful features twisted with rage. But when Vincent demanded answers, the confession that poured out would expose a calculated deception so evil. It would make him question everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd trusted with the most vulnerable person in his world. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. Vincent Robinson had built his empire on timing. At 35, he'd learned that fortunes were made and lost in the space of a heartbeat, that the difference between success and failure often came down to being in the right place at the exact right moment. But as his custom Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble foyer of his Connecticut mansion, Vincent was about to discover that sometimes, arriving at the wrong moment could destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. The Robinson estate sprawled across 22 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its Georgian colonial facade a testament to the kind of old-money respectability that Vincent had clawed his way up from the working-class streets of Hartford to achieve. Every inch of the property screamed success, from the perfectly manicured gardens that required a team of 6 landscapers, to the circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen luxury vehicles, to the fountain imported stone by stone from a 16th-century Italian villa. Vincent's net worth had crossed the billion-dollar mark 3 months ago, making him the youngest self-made billionaire in Connecticut's history. His investment firm, Robinson Capital, managed portfolios for Fortune 500 companies and European royalty alike. But all the money in the world couldn't buy back what he'd lost 2 years ago when his mother, Eleanor Robinson, suffered a massive stroke that left her paralyzed from the waist down and struggling to speak clearly. He'd been in Tokyo closing a deal when it happened. His assistant had called him at 3 in the morning, her voice shaking as she delivered the news that would change everything. Vincent had chartered the fastest jet he could find, but by the time he reached Hartford Hospital, his mother, the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put him through Harvard, who had mortgaged her small house twice to help him start his first business, was trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her commands. The guilt still ate at him. He'd been so focused on expanding into Asian markets, so consumed with proving himself on the global stage, that he'd missed the warning signs. The little stumbles his mother had dismissed as clumsiness. The moments of confusion she'd blamed on being tired. The headaches she'd hidden behind forced smiles during their weekly phone calls. Vincent had transformed the east wing of his mansion into a medical suite that rivaled the finest rehabilitation centers in the country. Physical therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, nurses around the clock. He'd spent over $2 million creating an environment where his mother could live with dignity and comfort, but nothing could give her back her independence. Eleanor Robinson had been a force of nature before the stroke. A retired high school principal who'd spent 40 years shaping young minds. She'd been the kind of woman who commanded respect without ever having to demand it. Sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and blessed with the kind of moral compass that had guided Vincent through every major decision of his life. Now she was confined to a wheelchair, her once clear voice reduced to slurred whispers that broke Vincent's heart every time he heard them. That's when Amira had entered their lives like a sunrise after the darkest night. Amira Jones was everything Vincent hadn't known he was looking for. At 26, She possessed a beauty that stopped conversations in crowded rooms, skin the color of warm honey, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief, a smile that could light up his cold boardrooms and make him forget about profit margins and quarterly reports. But it wasn't just her beauty that had captured him. Amira was brilliant, holding a master's degree in social work from Columbia, running her own non-profit organization that provided support services for families dealing with disability. She'd literally crashed into his life 7 months ago outside Hartford Hospital. Vincent had been leaving another frustrating meeting with his mother's neurologist when Amira, rushing to visit one of her clients, had collided with him in the revolving door. Coffee had gone flying, documents had scattered, and in the chaos of apologies and shared laughter, something had sparked between them that Vincent had never experienced before. Their courtship had been intense and swift. Amira understood his mother's condition in ways that Vincent's previous girlfriends never had. She spoke the language of medical equipment and therapy schedules. She knew how to communicate with someone struggling with aphasia. Most importantly, she seemed genuinely fond of Eleanor, spending hours reading to her, helping her with physical therapy exercises, treating her with the kind of patience and respect that made Vincent fall deeper in love with her every day. When Vincent had proposed 3 months ago, a candlelit dinner on the terrace overlooking the gardens, with a 10-carat diamond that had cost more than most people's houses, Amira had said yes with tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd moved into the mansion 2 weeks later, taking over much of Eleanor's day-to-day care coordination, and giving Vincent the freedom to travel for business without the constant worry that had been eating him alive. What do you think happens when someone you love and trust shows a completely different side of themselves? Have you ever discovered something shocking about someone close to you? Share your experience in the comments below. Which brought him to this moment, standing in his foyer at 6 in the evening on a Tuesday, a full 3 days earlier than anyone expected him home. The acquisition deal in Switzerland had collapsed faster than anticipated. The family business he'd been trying to purchase had decided at the last minute that they couldn't bear to sell their great-grandfather's company to an American, no matter how much money was on the table. Vincent had been frustrated, but not devastated. There were always other deals, other opportunities. The early return meant he could surprise Amira and spend extra time with his mother, maybe take them both out to dinner at that French restaurant Eleanor had loved before her stroke. He'd even stopped at Tiffany's in Zurich to pick up a bracelet for Amira, a peace offering for being away for a week, and perhaps an early wedding gift. But as Vincent stood in the marble foyer of his home, surrounded by oil paintings that had cost more than most people's annual salaries and furniture that had been featured in Architectural Digest, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Usually, he'd hear the soft murmur of conversation from the medical suite, or the gentle hum of Eleanor's favorite classical music station playing in the background. Instead, there was an odd silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Vincent loosened his silk tie and called out, "Amira? I'm home early." His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings and marble floors, but there was no response. Vincent frowned, checking his Rolex. 6:15. Eleanor's evening medications were usually administered at 6, and Amira was religious about maintaining the schedule that kept his mother comfortable and alert. Maybe they were in the garden. Eleanor loved being wheeled out to the rose garden in the evenings when the weather was nice, and October in Connecticut had been unusually warm this year. Amira often said that fresh air was better medicine than anything that came in a pill bottle. Vincent dropped his Louis Vuitton briefcase beside the antique console table and headed toward the east wing of the house. The medical suite occupied what had once been his father's study and library, rooms that had stood empty for 15 years since cancer had claimed James Robinson at the age of 58. Vincent had initially resisted converting the space, feeling like he was somehow erasing his father's memory, but Eleanor had been the one to suggest it. "Your father would have wanted his favorite rooms to be useful again," she'd told him in those difficult weeks after her stroke, when they'd been planning the renovations. He always said a house should serve the living, not shrine the dead. As Vincent approached the suite, he heard voices. Amira's voice, raised in a way he'd never heard before, sharp with an edge that made his footsteps slow. And something else, a sound that made his blood run cold. His mother was crying. Vincent's heart rate spiked as he moved closer to the partially open door of the main room. Eleanor rarely cried anymore. The stroke had seemed to dull her emotional responses along with her physical capabilities, leaving her in a state of resigned acceptance that broke Vincent's heart daily. To hear her sobbing now, "You think you can just waltz around here like you own the place?" Amira's voice carried clearly through the door, but the tone was nothing like the warm, patient voice Vincent knew. This voice was filled with venom, with a cruelty that seemed impossible coming from the woman he'd asked to marry him. "You sit in that chair, playing the victim, making everyone feel sorry for you, while you poison Vincent against me with your little comments and your disapproving looks." Vincent stopped dead in the hallway, his hand frozen halfway to the door handle. What was Amira talking about? His mother could barely speak clearly enough to order her own meals, let alone manipulate anyone against anything. And disapproving looks? Eleanor had seemed to genuinely like Amira, had welcomed her into their family with the same grace she'd shown everyone Vincent had ever brought home. Please," came his mother's voice, slurred and desperate in a way that made Vincent's chest tighten. I didn't, the cup." "Oh, you didn't what?" Amira's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You didn't deliberately use my favorite coffee mug? The one I specifically told you was off limits? You didn't sit there with your shaking hands, ruining something that belonged to me?" The sound of something shattering made Vincent's muscles tense. Without thinking, he pushed the door open just wide enough to see into the room, and what he saw made his world tilt off its axis. Amira stood in the center of the medical suite, magnificent and terrible in a way Vincent had never seen before. She was wearing designer workout clothes, a matching set that had probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Her hair pulled back in a high ponytail that showed off the diamond earrings he'd given her for their 3-month anniversary. Her skin was flushed with anger, her eyes blazing with a fury that transformed her beautiful features into something almost unrecognizable. But it wasn't her anger that stopped Vincent's heart. It was the wooden walking cane, his grandfather's antique walking stick that had been displayed in the room as decoration, raised high above her head like a weapon. And below her, cowering in her wheelchair, was his mother. Eleanor Robinson sat trapped in her chair, her grey hair disheveled, her pale blue cardigan torn at the shoulder. Her face was streaked with tears, and there was a red mark across her left cheek that made Vincent's vision go white around the edges. The remains of a coffee mug, Amira's favorite, the one with the hand-painted flowers that she'd bought at some boutique in Manhattan, lay scattered across the hardwood floor, coffee staining the Persian rug that had belonged to Vincent's grandmother. Eleanor's right arm, the one that still worked properly, was raised defensively in front of her face, while her left arm hung uselessly at her side. Her mouth was open as if she was trying to speak, but only soft whimpers escaped. "You pathetic old woman," Amira snarled, the cane trembling in her grip. "You think because you gave birth to him, because you raised him, that you have some claim on him? Well, let me explain something to you. I'm his future. You're just baggage he's too guilty to throw away." The words hit Vincent like physical blows, but it was what happened next that shattered every illusion he'd ever had about the woman he'd planned to spend his life with. Amira drew the cane back, and Vincent could see in her eyes that she was going to strike his helpless mother. "Stop!" The word exploded from Vincent's throat with such force that both women froze. Amira's head whipped toward the door, her eyes wide with shock, and something that looked almost like annoyance at being interrupted. The cane remained raised, trembling in her grip. Eleanor's tear-filled gaze found his through the doorway, and Vincent saw something in her expression that cut deeper than any business loss ever could. relief mixed with shame, as if she was embarrassed to be seen in such a helpless state, as if this was somehow her fault. Vincent stepped fully into the room, and for a moment that stretched like an eternity, nobody moved. The afternoon sun streamed through the French doors that led to the garden, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and casting everything in golden light that seemed obscenely beautiful given what he'd just witnessed. "Vincent," Amira said, her voice instantly shifting to the honey-sweet tone he knew so well, though the cane still hadn't lowered. "Sweetheart, you're home early. Your mother had an accident with the coffee mug, and I was helping." "Don't." The single word cut through her explanation like a blade. Vincent's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of every boardroom negotiation he'd ever dominated, every hostile takeover he'd ever orchestrated. It was the voice of a man who had built an empire on reading people, on seeing through lies and manipulation, and who had just realized he'd been blind to the most important deception of his life. "Put the cane down. Now, how do you think someone could hide such cruelty for so long? What signs might Vincent have missed? Let me know your thoughts below." The cane clattered to the hardwood floor with a sound like thunder in the suffocating silence of the medical suite. But Amira's compliance felt hollow, performed rather than genuine, and Vincent could see in her eyes that she was already calculating her next move. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with the most precious thing in his world, was transforming before his eyes into someone he didn't recognize. Vincent moved carefully toward his mother, each step deliberate and controlled despite the rage burning in his chest like molten steel. Eleanor sat hunched in her wheelchair, her thin frame shaking with silent sobs, her right hand pressed against the red mark on her cheek. The sight of that handprint, clear and damning, made something primitive and dangerous uncurl in Vincent's chest. "Mom," he said softly, kneeling beside her wheelchair and gently taking her trembling hand in his. Her skin felt paper-thin and cold, and when she looked at him, her grey eyes were filled with a mixture of relief and terror that broke his heart into pieces. "Are you hurt? Did she?" His voice caught in his throat as he forced himself to ask the question. "Did she hit you?" Eleanor's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out, her speech made even more difficult by stress and fear. I'm sorry about the cup," she finally managed, each word a struggle. "My hands, they shake sometimes." The apology destroyed Vincent. His proud, dignified mother, a woman who had commanded respect in every room she entered, who had raised him to stand up to bullies and protect those who couldn't protect themselves, was apologizing for being the victim of abuse. She was trying to shield him from the truth, even as the evidence was written across her face in red welts and tear tracks. "Mom, listen to me," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to tear him apart. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you understand me?" Before Eleanor could respond, Amira's voice cut through the moment like a blade dipped in honey. "Vincent, thank God you're here. I've been so worried about your mother." The transformation in her voice was masterful. Gone was the venom and cruelty he'd heard from the hallway, replaced by the warm concern that had first made him fall in love with her. "She's been having such a difficult day. The tremors in her hands have been worse, and she's been so frustrated. When she dropped the coffee mug, she just broke down crying." Vincent slowly rose to his feet and turned to face the woman he had asked to marry him. Amira stood 5 feet away, her posture perfect, her expression carefully crafted into one of loving concern. But Vincent had spent 15 years reading people across negotiation tables, 15 years spotting lies and manipulation disguised as sincerity. And now that he knew what to look for, he could see all the tells he'd been blind to before. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders that spoke of coiled aggression barely held in check, the calculated tilt of her head that was designed to look sympathetic but felt mechanical, rehearsed. How had he missed it? How had he been so completely taken in by a performance? She broke down crying, Vincent repeated slowly, his voice carrying no inflection at all. From frustration about dropping a coffee mug. Exactly. Amira stepped closer, her hand reaching toward him in a gesture that had always calmed him before, but now made his skin crawl. You know how proud she is, how much she hates feeling helpless. I was just trying to comfort her when you walked in. By standing over her with a walking stick? The question hung in the air between them like a blade. For just a moment, Amira's mask slipped, and Vincent caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating in her eyes before the concerned fiancé expression snapped back into place. I picked it up to move it out of the way, she said, her voice growing slightly sharper despite her obvious effort to maintain control. You know how cluttered this room is with all the medical equipment. I was worried she might hurt herself on it. It was a plausible explanation, the kind of reasonable lie that might have fooled him 7 months ago when he was desperate to believe that someone could love him and his mother both. But Vincent had heard her words through the door. He had seen the fury in her face, the raised weapon in her hands, the terror in his mother's eyes. Is that why she has a handprint on her face? Vincent asked, his voice deadly quiet. Because you were moving furniture? The silence that followed was deafening. Amira's mouth opened and closed several times, and Vincent could practically see her mind racing for an explanation that would fit her narrative. Behind him, Eleanor made a soft whimpering sound that cut through the air like a cry for help. Amira started, then stopped, her perfectly composed mask finally beginning to crack. Vincent, you don't understand. You've been gone for a week, and she's been impossible. Demanding, manipulative, trying to turn the staff against me. She's been what? Vincent's voice was still quiet, but there was something in his tone that made Amira take a step backward. Manipulative? My mother, who can barely string 3 words together since her stroke. Demanding? The woman who apologizes for needing help using the bathroom. You don't see it because you're not here. The words burst out of Amira like water through a broken dam, and suddenly the mask was gone completely, revealing the woman who had been hiding underneath all along. You don't see how she looks at me, how she undermines everything I do. She hates me, Vincent. She's always hated me. Vincent felt something cold settle in his chest as he stared at this stranger wearing his fiancée's face. Why would she hate you, Amira? Because I'm not good enough for her precious son. Amira's voice rose with each word, her carefully controlled facade crumbling into ugly pieces. Because I'm young and black and from the wrong side of town, and she thinks I'm some kind of gold digger who doesn't deserve to be in her perfect white family. The accusation hit Vincent like a physical blow, but not for the reasons Amira seemed to expect. Eleanor Robinson had spent 40 years teaching in Hartford's inner-city schools, 40 years fighting for students that other teachers had written off, 40 years proving that she judged people by their character and not their color or economic background. The woman who had raised Vincent to see value in every human being was now being painted as a racist by the woman he'd trusted to care for her. She never said anything like that, Vincent said, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. She never objected to our engagement, never questioned your motives, never. She didn't have to say it. Amira snapped. I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. The disapproval, the judgment. Like I was some kind of charity case you'd brought home to show how progressive you are. Vincent turned to look at his mother, who was watching this exchange with wide, frightened eyes. Eleanor had always been an excellent judge of character. It was what had made her such an effective principal, what had helped her guide Vincent through every major decision of his life. Had she seen something in Amira that Vincent had missed? Had she tried to warn him in her limited way, only to have her concerns dismissed, because he was so desperate to believe he'd found love? What did she do today, Amira? Vincent asked, turning back to face the woman who had shattered his world. What terrible crime did my disabled mother commit that justified you threatening her with violence? Amira's jaw tightened, and for a moment Vincent thought she might try to continue the pretense. But something in his expression must have told her that the game was over, that no amount of manipulation would restore what had been broken. "She used my coffee mug," Amira said, her voice flat and cold now. "The one from Bergdorf's that I specifically told her was mine. She was sitting there drinking her morning coffee out of it, smiling at me like she'd won some kind of victory." Vincent stared at her in disbelief. "She used a coffee mug. My coffee mug. The one I bought for myself with my own money. The only thing in this entire house that was truly mine." Amira's voice began to rise again, hysteria creeping in around the edges. "And when I told her to stop using it, she just looked at me with those smug eyes and kept drinking. So you decided to beat her with a walking stick." "I was trying to teach her some respect," Amira shouted, all pretense of control finally gone. "I'm going to be your wife, Vincent. I'm going to be the lady of this house, and she needs to understand that she can't just get out." The words exploded from Vincent with such force that the French doors leading to the garden seemed to rattle in their frames. Amira jerked back as if she'd been slapped, her eyes widening in shock. "Vincent, please, you're overreacting. Get out of my house." Vincent had never raised his voice to a woman in his life. He had been raised to respect and protect, to use his strength to shield others rather than intimidate them. But seeing his vulnerable mother cowering in fear, seeing the evidence of abuse written across her face, had awakened something primal in him that transcended all social conventions. "This is my home too," Amira said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "We're engaged. I live here." "Not anymore." Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. "Marcus will be here in 15 minutes to escort you off the property. You can collect your belongings tomorrow, supervised by my attorneys." Marcus Chin was Vincent's head of security, a former Marine who had been protecting the Robinson family for over 5 years. Vincent knew he could trust Marcus to handle this situation with professionalism and discretion. "You can't be serious," Amira said, but Vincent could see fear creeping into her expression now. "Vincent, I love you. We're getting married in 3 months. The invitations have already been sent. The engagement is off." Vincent's voice was ice-cold now, all emotion drained from it as his business instincts took over. "I'll have my lawyers contact yours about returning the ring and cancelling the wedding arrangements. You're throwing away what we have over a misunderstanding." Amira's voice took on a pleading quality, and she tried once more to step closer to him. "Over her? She's going to be dead in a few years anyway, Vincent. We could have had a lifetime together." The casual cruelty of those words, the dismissal of his mother's life as an inconvenience to be endured, hit Vincent like a physical blow. But it also crystallized something inside him, turning his hurt and betrayal into something harder and more permanent. "You're right about one thing," Vincent said quietly. "She might not have many years left, which means every day she has is precious to me. Every moment of peace and dignity she deserves is sacred. And I will never, ever let anyone threaten that again." The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced Marcus's arrival. Vincent had texted him to use his own key and come straight to the medical suite. There would be no arguing in the foyer, no dramatic scenes for the household staff to witness. Marcus Chin appeared in the doorway, his presence somehow making the room feel safer despite the fact that he was barely 5'8" and probably weighed less than Vincent did. But there was something about the former Marine's quiet confidence, the way he assessed a situation and took control without drama or fuss, that commanded instant respect. "Mr. Robinson," Marcus said with a slight nod, his dark eyes quickly taking in the scene. The scattered remains of the coffee mug, Eleanor's tear-streaked face, Amira's defensive posture, the walking stick lying on the floor like evidence of what had nearly happened. "Marcus, please escort Miss Jones off the property," Vincent said, not taking his eyes off Amira's face. She'll be returning tomorrow with legal representation to collect her belongings. Understood, sir. Marcus stepped aside and gestured toward the doorway. Ma'am, if you would please come with me. Have you ever had to make an instant decision that changed everything in your life? How do you know when someone has crossed a line that can never be uncrossed? Share your thoughts below. For a moment, Amira didn't move. She stood frozen in the center of the room, looking between Vincent and Marcus as if she couldn't quite believe this was happening. Then, slowly, her expression began to change. The pleading mask fell away, replaced by something ugly and vindictive. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you're stuck in this mausoleum taking care of a vegetable for the rest of your life. Don't call me when you realize what you've thrown away. She started toward the door, then stopped and turned back one last time. You think she's so innocent, so perfect? Amira's laugh was bitter and cruel. Ask her about the things she said when she thought I couldn't understand her slurred speech. Ask her about how she told the nurses that she hoped I would leave you. Ask her about the way she sabotaged our relationship from day one. Ma'am, Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through Amira's tirade. We need to go now. Amira shot one last venomous look at Eleanor, who shrank back in her wheelchair as if trying to disappear. Then she swept from the room with Marcus following close behind, her high heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. Vincent listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway, heard the front door open and close, heard the sound of Marcus's car starting in the driveway. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, to feel the full weight of what had just happened. He turned back to his mother, who was sitting very still in her wheelchair, her grey eyes fixed on her folded hands. The red mark on her cheek seemed to stand out even more starkly now that they were alone, a visible reminder of how close she had come to serious injury. Mom, Vincent said softly, pulling a chair close to her wheelchair and sitting down so they were eye level. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Eleanor looked up at him, and Vincent was shocked to see something that looked almost like guilt in her expression. I should have told you, she whispered, her words still slurred, but more understandable now that her stress was beginning to subside. But I wanted you to be happy. What should you have told me? Eleanor's right hand trembled as she reached up to touch the mark on her cheek. She wasn't kind when you weren't here. Little things. Mean comments. But I thought maybe I was wrong about her. Vincent felt his heart break all over again as he realized what his mother had endured. Eleanor Robinson, who had spent her career protecting students from bullies, had been bullied in her own home by the woman Vincent had trusted to care for her, and she had suffered in silence rather than risk his happiness. You were trying to protect me, Vincent said, reaching out to gently take her hand. But Mom, my happiness doesn't matter if it comes at the cost of your safety. Nothing matters more than that. Nothing. Eleanor squeezed his hand with what strength she had. I'll love you, she whispered. I love you too, Mom. And I promise you, I swear to you, that nothing like this will ever happen again. As Vincent sat holding his mother's hand in the golden afternoon light streaming through the French doors, surrounded by the ruins of his engagement and the shattered pieces of his trust, he realized that some betrayals cut so deep they didn't just change your opinion of one person. They changed your understanding of yourself. How had he been so blind? How had he missed the signs that must have been there all along? And most importantly, how would he ever trust his own judgment again? But those were questions for another day. Right now, all that mattered was the fragile woman beside him, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him and who deserved to spend her remaining years in peace and dignity. Vincent had built an empire by learning from his mistakes and never making the same one twice. This would be the most expensive lesson of his life, but perhaps the most important one as well. Outside, he could hear the sound of Marcus's car returning from wherever he had taken Amira. Soon, There would be lawyers to call and arrangements to make. The wedding invitations would need to be cancelled, the deposits forfeited, the explanations given to shocked friends and family members. But first, Vincent was going to sit with his mother and try to rebuild what had been broken, starting with her faith that she was safe in her own home. The silence that settled over the medical suite after Amira's departure felt heavy and suffocating, like the air before a storm. Vincent remained seated beside his mother's wheelchair, her frail hand still clasped in his, both of them staring at the scattered remains of the coffee mug that had somehow become the catalyst for his world falling apart. 3 hours had passed since Marcus had escorted Amira off the property. 3 hours of phone calls to lawyers, wedding planners, and the rehabilitation center to request an emergency session with Eleanor's therapist. 3 hours of trying to process the fact that the woman he'd planned to marry had been abusing his disabled mother while he traveled the world building his empire. The house felt different now, larger somehow, echoing with the weight of betrayal and the absence of someone who had never really belonged there in the first place. Vincent had instructed the household staff to remove all traces of Amira from the common areas, her magazines from the coffee tables, her favorite wine from the cellar, the ridiculous throw pillows she'd insisted on adding to the formal living room. It was as if he was trying to erase 7 months of his life, to pretend he'd never been foolish enough to trust someone who had played him like a violin. Eleanor had barely spoken since Amira left. The shock of the confrontation had left her even more withdrawn than usual, and Vincent could see her retreating into the shell of silence that had become her refuge since the stroke. She'd allowed the nursing staff to check her over. No serious injuries, just the handprint bruise on her cheek, and some soreness where she'd been gripped too tightly. But she'd answered their gentle questions with nods and shakes of her head rather than attempting to speak. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Eleanor's primary physician, had arrived within an hour of Vincent's call. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair, she'd been treating Eleanor since the stroke and had become something of a family friend. Vincent trusted her completely, which was why her words had hit him like a physical blow. "Vincent, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Dr. Mitchell had said after examining Eleanor, her voice gentle but firm. "The bruising on your mother's face is consistent with being struck, but I'm also seeing some older marks on her arms. Faded bruises that look like finger grips. Has she been falling more frequently? Having accidents with her wheelchair?" The implication had been clear, and Vincent had felt sick as he realized what she was really asking. How long had this been going on? How many times had Amira hurt his mother while he was away, believing he was building a future for all of them? "I don't know," Vincent had admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I trusted. I thought she was taking good care of her." Dr. Mitchell had nodded with the kind of professional compassion that came from delivering bad news to families for decades. "Abuse of elderly or disabled individuals often escalates gradually," she'd explained. "It starts with verbal cruelty, moves to intimidation, and eventually becomes physical. The victims are often reluctant to report it, especially when they're dependent on their abuser for care." After the doctor left, Vincent had sat alone in his study, staring at the engagement announcement that had run in the Hartford Courant just 2 months ago. The photographer had captured them at a charity gala, Vincent in his tailored tuxedo and Amira radiant in emerald green silk, both of them smiling at the camera like they had the world by the tail. Looking at it now, Vincent could see what he'd missed then. The way Amira's smile was perfect but somehow empty, the way she held herself just slightly apart from him even as she posed for the cameras. How many other signs had he missed? How many red flags had he dismissed because he was so grateful to find someone who seemed to understand his situation, who didn't run away when faced with the reality of caring for his disabled mother? Vincent's phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, pulling him from his dark thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and Vincent answered immediately. "She's not going quietly, sir," Marcus said without preamble. She's been calling and texting non-stop from the hotel, demanding to speak with you, threatening legal action, claiming you've breached some kind of contract by ending the engagement. Vincent rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Block her number. Have the lawyers handle any legal threats. And Marcus? Increase security around the property. I don't want her anywhere near my mother again. Already done, sir. But there's something else you should know. The tone in Marcus's voice made Vincent straighten in his leather chair. What is it? I spoke with Maria, the day nurse who's been working with your mother for the past 6 months. She's been wanting to talk to you, but didn't know how to approach the subject. Apparently, Miss Jones had policies about your mother's care that Maria found troubling. Vincent's grip tightened on the phone. Maria Santos was a dedicated professional who had worked with stroke patients for over 15 years. If she had concerns, they were worth taking seriously. What kind of policies? She insisted on being present during all medical appointments and therapy sessions. Told the staff that you had authorized her to make decisions about your mother's care in your absence. She also restricted visitors, apparently turned away several of your mother's former colleagues who came to see her, claiming it was too stressful for Mrs. Robinson. The words hit Vincent like individual hammers. Eleanor had been isolated, cut off from her support system while he traveled the world, oblivious to what was happening in his own home. Amira hadn't just been cruel. She'd been systematically controlling every aspect of his mother's life. There's more, Marcus continued. Maria says Miss Jones often became impatient during therapy sessions, would make comments about your mother being stubborn or ungrateful when the exercises were difficult. Several times, she sent the therapists home early, claiming your mother was too tired to continue. Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of his failure settling on his shoulders. Eleanor's progress had been slower than expected over the past few months. Her physical therapist had mentioned concerns about regression in her speech and mobility, but they'd attributed it to the natural progression of her condition. Now Vincent wondered how much of that regression had been caused by deliberate sabotage. Marcus, I want you to compile a complete record of everything. Interview every staff member who worked with my mother while I was away. Document everything they remember about Miss Jones's behavior. I have a feeling we're going to need it. After hanging up with Marcus, Vincent made his way back to the medical suite. He found Eleanor exactly where he'd left her, sitting by the window that overlooked the garden, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. The afternoon sun was fading, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting the delicate lines of her face. She looked so small in the wheelchair, so fragile, that Vincent felt his chest tighten with protective fury all over again. This was the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put him through college, who had mortgaged her house twice to help him start his first business, who had never asked for anything in return except to see him happy and successful. And he had repaid her sacrifices by bringing her abuser into their home. "Mom," Vincent said softly, pulling his chair close to her wheelchair again. "We need to talk." Eleanor turned to look at him, and Vincent was struck by how tired she seemed. Not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted in a way that spoke to months of enduring something terrible in silence. "I know this is hard," Vincent continued, "but I need to understand what happened while I was away. Not just today, but over the past few months. Can you help me understand?" Eleanor's mouth worked silently for several moments before she managed to speak. She said you wouldn't believe me," she whispered, her words slurred but clear enough. "Said I was confused because of the stroke." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Amira had used Eleanor's own medical condition against her, making her doubt her own perceptions and feel like her concerns would be dismissed as symptoms of brain damage. "I would have believed you," Vincent said firmly. "I will always believe you. Always." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again, and she reached out with her good hand to touch his face. I wanted you to be happy, she said. You seemed so happy with her. The words broke Vincent's heart. His mother had endured abuse and isolation, rather than risk disrupting what she thought was his chance at happiness. The selflessness of it, the quiet courage it must have taken to suffer in silence, made him feel like the worst kind of failure as a son. Tell me about the other times, Vincent said gently. When did it start? Eleanor was quiet for so long that Vincent thought she might not answer. Then, slowly, haltingly, the story began to emerge. It had started small, just weeks after Amira moved in. Little comments about Eleanor being high maintenance or demanding. Subtle changes to her routine. Meals served later, therapy sessions cut short. Visitors turned away with excuses about Eleanor being too tired for company. Amira had been careful to be sweet and attentive whenever Vincent was home, but the mask came off the moment his car pulled out of the driveway. She would take things, Eleanor whispered. Small things. My reading glasses. The remote control. Then act like I had lost them because of the stroke. Gaslighting. Vincent knew the term from his business dealings with manipulative partners and competitors, but hearing it applied to his vulnerable mother made his blood boil. Amira had systematically undermined Eleanor's confidence in her own memory and perception, making her question reality itself. Last month, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as she found the words, she took away my picture of your father. Said it was depressing to have dead people staring at us. When I asked for it back, she said maybe I should join him if I missed him so much. Vincent's hands clenched into fists in his lap. The picture Eleanor was referring to had sat on her bedside table for 15 years. A wedding photo of her and Vincent's father, taken when they were young and full of dreams. It was one of the few things that seemed to comfort her during her darkest moments, a tangible connection to the man she'd loved for 38 years. Where is the picture now? Vincent asked. I don't know. She took it away, and I never saw it again. Vincent made a mental note to have Marcus search Amira's belongings when they were retrieved tomorrow. The photograph would be returned to its rightful place, along with anything else she had taken. Why didn't the nursing staff say anything? Vincent asked. Maria, or any of the others? Eleanor looked down at her hands. She told them that you had asked her to make changes, that she was acting on your wishes, and she was always so sweet to them, so professional. It was only when we were alone. The picture that emerged was of a master manipulator, someone who had carefully constructed different personalities for different audiences. To Vincent, she'd been the loving fiancée who sacrificed her own needs to care for his mother. To the staff, she'd been the dutiful daughter-in-law following the family's wishes. To Eleanor, when no one else was watching, she'd been something entirely different. What would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted had been manipulating and hurting your family member? Share your thoughts in the comments. The coffee mug, Vincent said suddenly, remembering what had triggered the final confrontation. She said you deliberately used her favorite mug. Tell me what really happened. Eleanor's expression shifted, and for the first time since Vincent had arrived home, he saw a flash of something that looked almost like defiance in her eyes. I was thirsty, she said, her words coming more easily now. The nurses weren't here yet, and I managed to get to the kitchen in my wheelchair. I just wanted some coffee. Vincent waited, sensing there was more to the story. The mug was the only one I could reach, Eleanor continued. My cup was in the dishwasher, and the others were too high on the shelf. I didn't know it mattered so much to her. It shouldn't have mattered at all, Vincent said firmly. This is your house, Mom. Every cup, every plate, every piece of furniture in this place. It's all yours. You don't need permission to use anything. Eleanor nodded, but Vincent could see that months of psychological abuse had left their mark. She'd been made to feel like a guest in her own home, like someone who needed to ask permission for the most basic human needs. When she found me drinking from it, Eleanor continued, She was so angry. Angrier than I'd ever seen her. She started yelling about how it was the only thing in the house that was truly hers, how I was deliberately trying to take it away from her. And when I tried to apologize, when I tried to explain, she hit you. Eleanor nodded, touching the bruise on her cheek. She said I was playing the victim, trying to make her look bad. She said that when you got home, she was going to tell you I'd been falling again, that maybe it was time to put me in a nursing home. The threat hit Vincent like a physical blow. Amira hadn't just been abusing his mother. She'd been planning to have her removed from the family home entirely. The isolation would have been complete then, with Eleanor warehoused in some institutional setting, while Amira took over the life she'd been systematically destroying. Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor as he began to pace. The fury that had been building in his chest all day was reaching a crescendo, and he needed to move, to channel the energy somehow before it consumed him. "She's not going to get away with this," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person she really is." "Vincent," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying a note of warning. "Be careful. She's not stable. I could see it in her eyes today, when you came home. She's angry that she's been caught, but she's also desperate." Vincent stopped pacing and looked at his mother. Eleanor had spent 40 years dealing with troubled students, 40 years learning to read people and recognize danger. If she thought Amira was unstable, it wasn't a warning to take lightly. As if summoned by their conversation, Vincent's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but somehow he knew who it was before he answered. "Vincent, thank God." Amira's voice came through the speaker, breathless and urgent. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Vincent looked at his mother, who had gone very still in her wheelchair. Eleanor was staring at the phone with an expression of genuine fear, and Vincent realized that just the sound of Amira's voice was enough to trigger the trauma of what she'd endured. "There's nothing to explain," Vincent said coldly. "The engagement is over. Don't contact me again. You can't be serious about this." Amira's voice rose to a near shriek. "Vincent, I love you. We're supposed to be married in 3 months. You can't throw away everything we have because of one misunderstanding." "One misunderstanding?" Vincent's voice was deadly quiet now. "You were standing over my disabled mother with a weapon, Amira. You hit her. You've been abusing her for months, while I trusted you to care for her. I never meant to hurt her." Amira's voice cracked, and Vincent could hear her starting to cry. "I was just so frustrated, so tired of always coming second to her needs. Do you know what it's like, Vincent? Do you know what it's like to be engaged to someone who's more devoted to his mother than to his future wife?" The accusation was so twisted, so fundamentally wrong in its understanding of love and loyalty, that Vincent felt something cold settle permanently in his chest. "Yes," he said simply. "I know exactly what it's like to put family first. And if you can't understand that, then you never understood me at all. Vincent, please." Vincent ended the call and immediately blocked the number. But as he set the phone aside, he couldn't shake Eleanor's warning about Amira being unstable and desperate. A woman who had spent months carefully manipulating everyone around her wasn't going to simply disappear because she'd been exposed. The question was, what would she do next? As if reading his thoughts, Eleanor spoke up from her wheelchair. "She won't let this go quietly," she said, her voice steadier than it had been all day. She thinks she deserves everything you have. And she blames me for taking it away from her." Vincent returned to his chair beside his mother, taking her hand again. Outside, the sun had set completely, leaving the medical suite illuminated only by the soft glow of the bedside lamps. The house felt too quiet, too vulnerable, despite Marcus's security measures. "Mom," Vincent said quietly, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what she tries to do, you are safe now. I will never let anyone hurt you again. Eleanor squeezed his hand with what strength she had. "I know," she whispered. "But Vincent, what if she tries to hurt you?" The question hung in the air between them like a prophecy, and Vincent realized that his ordeal was far from over. Exposing Amira's abuse had been only the beginning. Now he had to deal with the consequences of backing a dangerous person into a corner. And somewhere in Hartford, in a hotel room paid for with money from the joint account she no longer had access to, Amira Jones was planning her next move. The attack came at 3 in the morning, when the autumn Connecticut night was at its darkest and most vulnerable. Vincent jolted awake in his bed, not to the sound of breaking glass or alarms, but to something far more insidious. His mother's voice calling his name through the baby monitor he'd installed after Amira's removal. "Vincent. Vincent, please." Eleanor's voice was thick with terror, the words more slurred than usual in her distress. She's here." Vincent was out of bed and running down the hallway before his conscious mind had fully processed what he'd heard. His bare feet slapped against the cold marble as he raced toward the medical suite, his heart hammering against his ribs with a rhythm that matched his footsteps. The security system hadn't been triggered, which meant either Marcus had failed to set it properly, unlikely, or someone with the access codes had gained entry. Someone like Amira. Vincent burst through the door to find a scene that would be burned into his memory forever. Eleanor sat rigid in her wheelchair beside her bed, her grey hair wild with sleep and fear, her right hand pressed against her throat as if trying to contain her racing pulse. And standing in the shadows by the French doors, backlit by the security lights from the garden, was the woman who had once promised to love, honor, and cherish them both. Amira looked nothing like the polished society fiancée who had graced charity galas and business dinners at Vincent's side. Her hair hung loose and uncombed around her shoulders, her designer clothes were wrinkled and stained, and her eyes held a wild gleam that spoke of someone who had crossed the line from manipulation into genuine madness. "There you are," she said, her voice carrying an eerily casual tone that was somehow more frightening than screaming would have been. "I was just having a lovely chat with your mother about how much she's going to miss me when I'm gone." Vincent's eyes quickly scanned the room, looking for weapons, escape routes, anything that might give him an advantage. The walking stick that Amira had threatened Eleanor with earlier was nowhere to be seen, but he noticed that several items from the medical equipment cart had been scattered across the floor. Syringes, medication bottles, and worse, a scalpel that gleamed silver in the dim light. "How did you get in here?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He positioned himself between Amira and his mother, his body tense and ready to move. Amira laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Did you really think changing the alarm codes would keep me out? I lived here for 4 months, Vincent. I know every entrance, every weakness in your precious security system. Marcus is very good, but he's not perfect." She held up a small device that Vincent recognized as a garage door opener. "The service entrance through the garden shed. You never bothered to change those codes because you never thought your loving fiancé would use them against you." Vincent felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night air. The meticulous planning this would have required, the cold calculation behind what appeared to be an emotional breakdown. It suggested that Amira's instability ran much deeper than he'd realized. "What do you want?" Vincent asked, though he was already moving slowly toward the emergency button that would summon Marcus and trigger the silent alarm to the local police station. "What do I want?" Amira's voice rose to a shriek before dropping back to that unnaturally calm tone. "I want my life back, Vincent. I want the future you promised me. I want what's mine." She began to pace in front of the French doors like a caged animal, her movements erratic and unpredictable. "Do you know what I've lost because of her?" Amira gestured wildly toward Eleanor, who flinched back in her wheelchair. "Everything, Vincent. My home, my security, my status. The wedding that was supposed to be featured in Town and Country magazine. The life I was supposed to have as Mrs. Vincent Robinson. You lost those things because you abused my mother, Vincent said firmly, his finger finally finding the emergency button behind the medical equipment cart. He pressed it twice, the signal for immediate assistance, and hoped Marcus would arrive before this situation spiraled completely out of control. I disciplined an ungrateful old woman who was trying to sabotage our relationship. Amira snapped. From the moment I moved in here, she was working against me. The little comments, the disapproving looks, the way she would monopolize your attention every time you came home. She was poisoning you against me, Vincent, and you were too blind to see it. Eleanor made a soft whimpering sound, and Vincent's protective instincts flared white-hot. My mother can barely speak clearly enough to order her own meals, he said, his voice deadly quiet. She's not capable of manipulating anyone. Oh, but she is, Amira said, her eyes gleaming with manic intensity. She's very clever, your precious mother, playing the helpless victim while she systematically destroyed everything I built with you. Do you want to know what she really said to me, Vincent? Do you want to know what your saint of a mother is really like? Vincent didn't want to hear whatever lies Amira was about to spin, but he needed to keep her talking until help arrived. Tell me. Amira's smile was cold and triumphant. Last month, when you were in London, I found her in your study. She was trying to access your computer. Did you know she could do that? She's much more capable than she lets on when it suits her purposes. Vincent glanced at his mother, who was shaking her head frantically, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form words of denial. She was looking through our engagement photos, Amira continued, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made Vincent's skin crawl. Deleting them, one by one. When I caught her, do you know what she said? She said that she would never allow a gold-digging little bitch to steal her son away from her. That's not true, Vincent said immediately, but Amira pressed on. She said she'd been pretending to like me, pretending to approve of our relationship, while she looked for ways to expose what she called my true nature. She said she knew I was only with you for your money, and she would make sure you saw it too. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that Vincent could see how someone might believe them. But he knew his mother, knew her heart and her character, and none of this rang true. Eleanor Robinson might have had concerns about Amira, concerns that had proven tragically accurate, but she would never have expressed them with such cruelty. Even if that were true, Vincent said carefully, it wouldn't justify what you did to her, wouldn't it? Amira's voice rose again, and she began pacing faster, her movements becoming more agitated. She declared war on me, Vincent. She made it clear that only one of us could have you, that there wasn't room in your life for both of us. Well, fine. She wants to play that game. Let's see who wins. The threat in her words was unmistakable, and Vincent felt his muscles tense as he prepared to put himself physically between Amira and his mother, if necessary. Where was Marcus? The emergency button should have triggered an immediate response. Amira, listen to me, Vincent said, using the same tone he employed in high-stakes negotiations when he needed to defuse tension. We can work this out. We can talk about this rationally. But first, I need you to step away from my mother. Rationally? Amira laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. You want to talk rationally? Let me tell you what's rational, Vincent. Your mother is going to die soon anyway. The doctors told you she might have another stroke at any time, that her condition will only get worse. But me? I could have given you decades. I could have given you children, a future, a life worth living instead of this mausoleum you're trapped in. The casual dismissal of Eleanor's life, the reduction of his mother to an inconvenience to be endured, crystallized everything that was wrong with Amira's worldview. She had never understood that Vincent's love for his mother wasn't a burden or an obligation. It was a privilege, a chance to repay even a fraction of the sacrifices Eleanor had made for him. She gave me life, Vincent said simply. She raised me, supported me, believed in me when no one else would. I don't consider caring for her a burden. I consider it an honor. How noble, Amira sneered. How perfectly noble and naive. Do you know what your precious mother cost me today, Vincent? My entire future. I had to move out of the suite at the Hilton because you froze our joint accounts. I'm staying in a motel room that smells like disinfectant and cigarettes. My friends are already whispering about why the engagement ended so suddenly. My business is going to suffer because half my clients were connections I made through you. Vincent felt no sympathy for her financial difficulties. She had chosen to become dependent on his wealth instead of maintaining her independence, had seen their relationship as a business transaction rather than a partnership built on love and respect. You still haven't answered my question, Vincent said. What do you want? Amira stopped pacing and turned to face him fully, and Vincent was shocked by what he saw in her expression. The manic energy was still there, but underneath it was something cold and calculating that suggested her apparent breakdown might be at least partially performed. I want my ring back on my finger, she said. I want a public apology for the way you humiliated me today. I want a generous settlement, let's say $10 million, for the emotional trauma you've caused me. And I want her, she pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor, out of this house and in a nursing facility where she belongs. The demands were so outrageous, so completely divorced from reality, that Vincent wondered if Amira truly believed she had any leverage in this situation. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Amira's right hand was resting on the medical equipment cart, her fingers wrapped around a syringe filled with clear liquid. Vincent had no way of knowing what was in it, insulin, morphine, or something worse. But in the hands of someone unstable enough to break into his home and threaten his disabled mother, any medication could become a weapon. And if I refuse? Vincent asked, though he was already calculating distances and angles, trying to figure out how quickly he could reach Amira if she made a move toward Eleanor. Then we'll see how devoted you really are to your mother, Amira said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier shouting. You see, Vincent, I've learned a lot about Eleanor's medical condition over the past few months. I know exactly which medications she takes, which ones she's allergic to, and which ones might cause complications if administered incorrectly. The threat was clear, and Vincent felt his world narrow to this single moment. This choice between the woman who had given him everything and the woman who wanted to take it all away. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust? How do you think people can protect their vulnerable family members from predators? Share your thoughts below. You're talking about murder, Vincent said, his voice steady despite the horror of what he was contemplating. I'm talking about accidents, Amira corrected. Tragic accidents that happen all the time in medical facilities. Confused elderly patients who take the wrong medications, who fall out of their wheelchairs, who suffer complications from their existing conditions. It would be so easy to make it look natural, Vincent. Especially with someone as frail as your mother. Eleanor made a sound that was part sob, part gasp, and Vincent saw her looking toward the door as if hoping for rescue. But no rescue was coming. Marcus should have been here by now, which meant either the emergency system had failed or Amira had somehow disabled it along with the other security measures. Think about what you're saying, Vincent said desperately. Amira, this isn't you. The woman I fell in love with would never. The woman you fell in love with never existed. Amira exploded, her careful control finally snapping completely. She was a character I created, a role I played to get what I wanted. Did you really think someone like me would fall for someone like you if you weren't worth $900 million? The truth hit Vincent like a physical blow. Not just the confirmation that Amira had never loved him. That much he'd already accepted. But the realization of how completely he'd been deceived. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every shared dream had been a performance designed to manipulate him into giving her access to his wealth and status. How long? Vincent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How long were you planning this? Amira's laugh was bitter and triumphant. From the moment I researched you after our accidental meeting at the hospital. Did you really think it was coincidence that I happened to be there that day? I'd been watching you for weeks, learning your routine, waiting for the perfect opportunity to bump into you. The meticulous planning behind their entire relationship was staggering. Vincent thought about all the small details that had made him believe their connection was real. Her genuine interest in his mother's condition, her willingness to help with Eleanor's care, her seeming understanding of the challenges they faced as a family. Even the non-profit work, Vincent asked. Especially the non-profit work, Amira said with obvious pride. Do you know how many wealthy men have disabled family members? How many of them are desperate for someone who understands their situation? I built my entire career around identifying and targeting men like you, Vincent. You just happen to be the biggest prize. Vincent felt physically sick as he realized the scope of the deception. Not just his relationship with Amira, but potentially dozens of other vulnerable families who had been targeted by someone who used their love for disabled relatives as a weapon against them. The other men, Vincent said. What happened to them? Some of them gave me what I wanted without too much trouble. Others required more, persuasion, usually involving their disabled family members having unfortunate accidents that required expensive settlements to avoid negative publicity. The casual admission to what amounted to a pattern of extortion and abuse made Vincent's vision go red around the edges. This wasn't just about him and Eleanor. It was about a predator who had built her entire life around exploiting families in their most vulnerable moments. You're insane, Vincent said. I'm practical, Amira corrected. I saw an opportunity and I took it. Just like I'm taking this opportunity now. You have 30 seconds to decide, Vincent. $10 million and your mother in a nursing home. Or we see how well she handles an accidental overdose of insulin. The syringe in Amira's hand caught the light as she raised it, and Vincent realized with crystal clarity that she wasn't bluffing. Whatever had driven her to this point, greed, desperation, or genuine mental illness, she was fully prepared to murder his mother if he didn't give her what she wanted. Vincent looked at Eleanor, who was watching him with eyes full of tears, but also something else. Trust. After everything she'd endured, after months of abuse and terror, she still trusted him to protect her. The weight of that trust, the responsibility of being the only thing standing between his mother and a woman who had proven herself capable of anything, settled on Vincent's shoulders like a mantle. All right, Vincent said quietly. You win. Amira's expression shifted immediately, triumph and relief flooding her features. I knew you'd see reason. You always were smart about business, Vincent. This is just another transaction. But I have one condition, Vincent continued, moving slowly toward Eleanor's wheelchair. I want to say goodbye to my mother before you take her away from me forever. Amira hesitated, clearly suspicious of any request that might give Vincent an advantage. But the appeal to her ego, the acknowledgement that she had won, seemed to override her caution. Fine, she said. But make it quick. And don't try anything stupid, Vincent. I still have this syringe, and I know exactly how to use it. Vincent knelt beside his mother's wheelchair and took her trembling hand in his. Eleanor looked up at him with eyes full of love and resignation, as if she had already accepted that this was how her story would end. Mom, Vincent whispered, his voice too low for Amira to hear clearly. When I say now, I want you to roll your wheelchair toward the bathroom as fast as you can. Don't look back, don't stop, just get to safety. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Despite her physical limitations, there was still fight left in Eleanor Robinson. Vincent rose to his feet and turned to face Amira, who was watching them with the kind of cold satisfaction that belonged on someone who had just closed a particularly profitable business deal. I'll need time to arrange the transfer of funds, Vincent said. $10 million isn't something I can just write a check for. You have until tomorrow morning, Amira said. Wire transfer to an account I'll provide. And Vincent, don't even think about trying to trace it or freeze it. I've learned a lot about offshore banking over the years. Of course you have, Vincent said. Just one more question. What? Vincent looked directly into Amira's eyes, seeing clearly for the first time the cold calculation that lived beneath her beautiful exterior. Did you ever feel anything real for me? Even for a moment? Amira's smile was answer enough, but she provided words anyway. You were a means to an end, Vincent. A very wealthy, very gullible means to an end. Vincent nodded slowly, as if accepting the final nail in the coffin of his illusions. Then he said the single word that would change everything. Now, everything that happened next occurred in the space of heartbeats. Eleanor's right arm, strengthened by months of physical therapy, gripped the wheels of her chair and sent her rolling toward the bathroom with surprising speed. Amira, caught off guard by the sudden movement, turned toward Eleanor with the syringe raised. And Vincent, with all the fury of a man protecting the most important person in his world, launched himself across the room. He hit Amira with the full force of his 6'2" frame, sending them both crashing into the medical equipment cart. The syringe went flying, its contents spraying harmlessly across the hardwood floor. Amira's scream of rage and frustration echoed off the ceiling as she fought against Vincent's superior strength, her fingernails raking across his face and drawing blood. But Vincent had advantages beyond just size and strength. He had the desperate fury of someone protecting his family, the clarity that came from finally seeing his enemy for what she truly was, and the knowledge that this moment would determine whether he saved his mother or failed her when she needed him most. The struggle lasted less than a minute. When it was over, Amira lay pinned beneath Vincent's weight, her wrists held firmly against the floor, her face twisted with a rage that made her beautiful features look almost demonic. "Get off me," she shrieked. "You don't understand what you're doing. I'll destroy you, Vincent. I'll destroy your reputation, your business, everything you've built." Vincent looked down at the woman who had nearly convinced him to spend his life with her, who had systematically abused his disabled mother, who had just threatened to commit murder for money. And he felt nothing but cold contempt. "No," he said quietly. "You won't." The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of reinforcements. Marcus burst through the door, followed by 2 uniformed police officers and a paramedic who immediately went to check on Eleanor. Vincent had never been so grateful to see another human being in his life. "Sir, are you injured?" Marcus asked, helping Vincent to his feet while the police officers took control of Amira. "I'm fine," Vincent said, though his face was bleeding from her fingernail scratches and his hands were shaking with adrenaline. "My mother? She's okay." The paramedic called out from the bathroom where Eleanor had taken refuge. "Shaken up but not injured. We should take her to the hospital for evaluation, but she appears to be stable." As the police officers cuffed Amira and read her rights, she continued to scream threats and accusations, her voice growing increasingly shrill and desperate. The controlled mask had fallen away completely now, revealing the predator who had been hiding underneath all along. "This isn't over, Vincent," she shouted as they led her toward the door. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. I'll find a way to make you pay for this." Vincent watched her go without emotion. The woman he had thought he loved, the woman he had planned to marry, was being led away in handcuffs for threatening to murder his mother. The irony wasn't lost on him that less than 24 hours ago, he'd been planning to spend the rest of his life with someone capable of such evil. As the commotion died down and the medical suite began to empty, Vincent found himself alone with Eleanor, who had been helped back into her wheelchair by the paramedic. Mother and son looked at each other across the wreckage of what had once been their safe haven, both of them marked by an experience that would change them forever. "It's over," Vincent said softly, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hand. It's finally over. Eleanor squeezed his fingers with all the strength she had. Thank you, she whispered, her voice clear despite her tears. Thank you for choosing me. Vincent felt his own eyes fill with tears as he realized what she meant. In the end, when faced with an impossible choice between his future and his past, between the woman he thought he loved and the woman who had given him life, he had chosen correctly. But as he held his mother's hand in the aftermath of betrayal and violence, Vincent wondered if he would ever be able to trust his own judgment again. Amira had fooled him completely, had manipulated him into bringing danger into his own home, had nearly cost him the most precious relationship in his life. The scars from this night would heal, but the lesson would remain forever. Love without wisdom was not love at all, but a dangerous illusion that could destroy everything you held dear. Still, as Vincent looked into his mother's grateful eyes, he knew that some choices were simple. Family came first. Family always came first. And anyone who threatened that would learn exactly what Vincent Robinson was capable of when protecting the people he loved. 6 months later, the spring morning sun streamed through the French doors of the medical suite, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor that had once been stained with spilled coffee and broken dreams. Vincent sat in his favorite leather chair, reading aloud from the Hartford Courant's business section, while his mother worked on her physical therapy exercises nearby. The routine had become sacred to them both, an hour each morning dedicated to rebuilding not just Eleanor's strength, but the trust and peace that had been shattered by Amira's betrayal. Robinson Capital announces record quarterly profits, Vincent read, glancing up to catch his mother's smile. The investment firm, led by CEO Vincent Robinson, has expanded its philanthropic division to include a new foundation focused on elder care advocacy and protection services for vulnerable adults. Eleanor paused in her arm exercises, her grey eyes sparkling with pride. Her speech had improved dramatically over the past 6 months, aided by intensive therapy and the return of emotional security to her daily life. "I'm proud of you," she said, the words clear and strong. "Your father would be proud too." The photograph she mentioned, the wedding picture of her and James Robinson, had been restored to its place of honor on her bedside table. Vincent had found it among Amira's belongings, deliberately hidden at the bottom of a suitcase like stolen treasure. Its return had marked the beginning of Eleanor's psychological healing, a tangible symbol that the things taken from her could be recovered. Vincent folded the newspaper and moved to help his mother with her more challenging exercises. The physical therapy routine had become a bonding ritual for them, a way to rebuild not just Eleanor's mobility, but the connection that had been damaged by months of manipulation and fear. Under the guidance of Dr. Mitchell and a new team of therapists, Eleanor had regained much of her strength and nearly all of her speech clarity. "How are you feeling about today?" Vincent asked as he supported her arm through its range of motion. The question referred to something they'd both been anticipating with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. Today was the day of Amira's sentencing. The legal proceedings had been swift and merciless. Amira Jones, whose real name turned out to be Amira Williams, and who had been using false credentials for years, had been charged with elder abuse, attempted murder, breaking and entering, fraud, and a dozen other counts that painted a picture of a career criminal who had built her life on exploiting vulnerable families. The investigation that followed her arrest had uncovered a trail of victims spanning 5 states and nearly a decade. Vincent's story had given other families the courage to come forward, revealing a pattern of abuse and extortion that had destroyed lives and torn apart families from Boston to Miami. The non-profit organization Amira claimed to run had been a complete fabrication, a front designed to give her credibility while she hunted for new targets. Vincent had testified at her trial 3 months ago, recounting the nightmare of that October evening when he'd come home to find his mother being threatened with violence. His voice had remained steady as he described Amira's confession to years of calculated manipulation, her threats against Eleanor's life, and the syringe she'd been prepared to use to commit murder. But it was Eleanor's testimony that had sealed Amira's fate. Despite her physical limitations, Eleanor Robinson had taken the stand with the dignity and strength that had defined her entire life. Speaking slowly but clearly, she had detailed months of psychological abuse, physical intimidation, and systematic isolation. Her words had carried the weight of truth and the quiet power of a woman who had survived the worst and found the courage to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. "I feel peaceful," Eleanor said now, completing her exercise routine and settling back in her wheelchair. "Whatever happens today, she can't hurt anyone else. That's what matters." Vincent nodded, understanding the complex emotions his mother was experiencing. There was no satisfaction in seeing another human being destroyed, even one who had caused such pain. But there was relief in knowing that Amira's ability to prey on vulnerable families had come to an end. The transformation in Eleanor over the past 6 months had been remarkable. Not just physically, though her strength and mobility had improved beyond what her doctors had thought possible. More importantly, she had reclaimed her sense of safety and dignity. The fearful, withdrawn woman who had cowered in her wheelchair that terrible October day had been replaced by someone who looked very much like the confident principal who had shaped young minds for 4 decades. "The therapist is coming at 11, Vincent said, checking his watch. "And Maria will be here this afternoon for your session with the new communication device." Eleanor smiled at the mention of Maria Santos, the day nurse who had become much more than a medical professional over the past months. After Amira's arrest, Maria had revealed the full extent of what she'd witnessed during those awful months. The systematic undermining of Eleanor's confidence, the restriction of visitors, the deliberate sabotage of therapy sessions. Her testimony had been crucial in building the case against Amira, but more importantly, her return to Eleanor's care team had helped restore the sense of normalcy and trust that made healing possible. The communication device Eleanor was learning to use represented another step forward in her recovery. While her speech had improved dramatically, she still struggled with fatigue that made long conversations difficult. The tablet-based system would give her another way to express herself, to maintain independence in her interactions with others. "Vincent," Eleanor said, her voice taking on the tone that meant she had something important to discuss. "We need to talk about your future." Vincent looked up from organizing her medication schedule, surprised by the shift in conversation. "What about it? You've spent 6 months taking care of me, rebuilding what she destroyed. But you can't spend the rest of your life hiding in this house, afraid to trust anyone new." The words hit closer to home than Vincent was comfortable acknowledging. Since Amira's betrayal, he had indeed withdrawn from the social life he'd once enjoyed. Business dinners were conducted in restaurants rather than bringing colleagues home. The few women who had shown interest in him had been politely but firmly rebuffed. The idea of allowing another stranger into their carefully rebuilt sanctuary felt impossible to contemplate. "I'm not hiding," Vincent protested, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. "You are," Eleanor said gently but firmly. "And I understand why. She hurt us both, Vincent. She made us question our judgment, our ability to trust our instincts about people. But we can't let her destroy our faith in the goodness that exists in the world." Vincent sat down heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair. At 35, he felt older than his years, marked by an experience that had shown him how easily evil could disguise itself as love. The confident businessman, who had once dominated boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, now second-guessed every social interaction, analyzed every conversation for hidden motives. "How do I trust my judgment again?" Vincent asked, the question that had haunted him for months finally spoken aloud. I was completely fooled by her, Mom. 7 months of my life, and I never saw who she really was. What if I'm just as blind the next time? Eleanor reached out and took his hand, her grip stronger than it had been in years. Because you're not the same person you were 6 months ago. You've learned what real love looks like, not the performance she gave you, but the kind of love that sacrifices for others, that protects the vulnerable, that chooses family over convenience. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. Vincent, the woman who is meant to be your partner will see me not as a burden to be endured, but as part of the package deal that comes with loving you. She'll understand that your loyalty to family is not a flaw to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. The wisdom in her words resonated deeply with Vincent. Amira had always seemed slightly impatient with the time and energy Eleanor's care required, had treated his devotion to his mother as an obstacle to their relationship rather than an insight into his character. Any woman who truly loved him would understand that his commitment to family was non-negotiable. I'm not ready yet, Vincent said honestly. The thought of bringing someone new into our lives, of risking what we've rebuilt. I'm not asking you to rush into anything, Eleanor assured him. I'm just asking you not to close yourself off permanently. Promise me that when the right person comes along, and she will, you'll be open to the possibility. Vincent squeezed his mother's hand, drawing strength from her resilience and wisdom. Eleanor Robinson had survived a devastating stroke, months of abuse, and a night of terror that could have broken someone half her age. If she could find the courage to remain open to the goodness in people, perhaps he could too. I promise, Vincent said. But for now, taking care of you is all the purpose I need. Eleanor's expression softened with love and gratitude. Taking care of each other, she corrected. We're a team, Vincent. We always have been. What role do you think family plays in helping us heal from betrayal and trauma? How can we learn to trust again after someone we loved has hurt us? Share your thoughts below. The sound of the doorbell interrupted their conversation, announcing the arrival of Eleanor's physical therapist. Vincent rose to answer it, but Eleanor caught his sleeve before he could leave. One more thing, she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief that reminded him of the woman she'd been before the stroke. I've been thinking about starting a support group for families dealing with elder abuse. I want to use what happened to us to help others. Vincent paused, considering the implications of what she was proposing. It would mean going public with their story, opening themselves up to scrutiny and possibly unwanted attention. But it would also mean that Eleanor's suffering could serve a purpose beyond their own healing. Are you sure you're ready for that? Vincent asked. I'm sure, Eleanor said with the kind of quiet determination that had carried her through 40 years of teaching and 2 years of recovery. She took a lot from us, Vincent. But she also gave us something valuable, the knowledge of how to spot predators, how to protect ourselves and others. I want to use that knowledge to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other families. Vincent felt a surge of pride as he looked at his mother. The idea of turning their trauma into a force for protecting others was exactly the kind of thinking that had made Eleanor Robinson such an effective educator and advocate. She had always believed that the best response to suffering was to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. Then we'll do it together, Vincent said. The Robinson Foundation for Elder Protection has a nice ring to it. Eleanor's smile lit up the room. I love you, Vincent. I love you too, Mom. As Vincent went to greet the physical therapist, he reflected on how much their relationship had deepened over the past 6 months. The crisis with Amira had stripped away any pretense or social conventions, leaving only the essential truth of their bond. They had always loved each other, but now they truly knew each other, not as the successful son and proud mother they presented to the world, but as two people who had faced evil together and emerged stronger. The therapy session progressed well, with Eleanor demonstrating improvements that surprised even her experienced therapist. Her mobility had increased significantly, and she was now able to transfer from her wheelchair to other seating with minimal assistance. More importantly, her confidence had returned, along with the spark of humor and intelligence that had always defined her personality. After the therapist left, Vincent and Eleanor spent the afternoon reviewing plans for the Elder Protection Foundation. They discussed everything from funding structures to program development, working together with the kind of natural partnership that came from complete trust and shared purpose. It felt good to be planning for the future again, to be building something positive from the ashes of their ordeal. As evening approached, Vincent received the call he'd been expecting. The prosecutor's office informed him that Amira had been sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge had cited the particularly heinous nature of her crimes, the targeting of vulnerable elderly and disabled individuals, as justification for the maximum sentence allowed under law. Vincent felt no joy at the news, only a sense of closure. Justice had been served, not just for them, but for all of Amira's victims. The woman who had built her life on exploiting others' love and loyalty would spend the next decade and a half learning that actions had consequences. That evening, Vincent and Eleanor sat on the terrace overlooking the garden, sharing a quiet dinner as the sun set over the Connecticut countryside. The roses were beginning to bloom again, their sweet fragrance carried on the warm spring breeze. It was a scene of peace and contentment that would have been impossible to imagine 6 months ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Regret what?" "Choosing me over her. Giving up your chance at marriage and children and a conventional future." Vincent looked at his mother, surprised by the question. "Mom, I didn't give up anything of value. I discovered what was truly important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Amira offered me the illusion of love built on lies and manipulation. You've given me the reality of love built on sacrifice and devotion. There's no comparison." Eleanor nodded, but Vincent could see that she was still processing her own complex feelings about how their ordeal had ended. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come home early that day." It was a thought that haunted Vincent as well. How much further would Amira's abuse have escalated? Would Eleanor have survived until his planned return, or would he have come home to find his mother dead from an accidental overdose or fall? "But I did come home," Vincent said firmly. "I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there. Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe that's what love does. It calls us home when the people we care about need us most." As they sat together in the comfortable silence that came from shared understanding, Vincent realized that his mother's question touched on something deeper than survivor's guilt. Eleanor was worried that her continued presence in his life would prevent him from finding happiness with someone else, that her needs would always be a barrier to his romantic fulfillment. "Mom," Vincent said softly, "I need you to understand something. Caring for you isn't a burden I've accepted. It's a privilege I've been given. You raised me to be the kind of man who protects the people he loves. That's not a flaw in my character that needs to be overcome. It's the best part of who I am." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. "How did I get so lucky to have you as my son?" "I ask myself the same question about having you as my mother," Vincent replied. As the night settled around them, peaceful and secure in their restored sanctuary, Vincent reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, they had been victims of manipulation, abuse, and their own misplaced trust. Tonight, they were survivors who had not only healed from their trauma, but found ways to use their experience to help others. The foundation they were planning would become their shared legacy, a testament to the truth that love and loyalty could triumph over evil and deception. Eleanor's support groups would provide safe spaces for families to share their stories and learn to recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Vincent's business connections would fund research and advocacy programs that could change laws and save lives. They had taken their worst experience and transformed it into their greatest purpose. Vincent knew that someday, perhaps sooner than he expected, the right woman would enter his life. Someone who would see his devotion to Eleanor not as competition, but as evidence of the depth of love he was capable of offering. Someone who would understand that the Robinson family came as a package deal, and that loving Vincent meant becoming part of something larger than just a romantic relationship. When that day came, he would be ready. Not because he had forgotten the lessons of Amira's betrayal, but because he had learned to trust the right things. The evidence of character over the performance of charm, the consistency of actions over the poetry of words, the willingness to sacrifice for others over the promise of personal gain. But for now, Vincent was content to sit in the gathering darkness with the woman who had given him life, taught him values, and shown him what unconditional love truly meant. Eleanor Robinson had survived a stroke, abuse, and the threat of murder, emerging from each trial stronger and more determined than before. She was his hero, his teacher, and his greatest blessing. As mother and son sat together under the stars, surrounded by the peace they had fought so hard to reclaim, Vincent knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with unwavering love and absolute trust in each other. Some bonds, he had learned, were too strong to be broken by any force on earth. The love between a mother and son, forged in sacrifice and tempered by shared struggle, was one of those eternal truths that gave meaning to life itself. Vincent Robinson was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the person who mattered most. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. In the distance, the security lights illuminated the garden where Eleanor loved to spend her mornings, the roses blooming in defiant beauty against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to build something meaningful from the lessons they had learned. But tonight, there was only peace, gratitude, and the quiet satisfaction of having chosen correctly when it mattered most. Love had won, family had endured, and two people who had faced the worst of human nature had emerged with their faith in goodness intact. It was, Vincent thought as he helped Eleanor back into the house, exactly the ending their story deserved. What does family mean to you? How do you think we can better protect our elderly and vulnerable loved ones from those who would harm them? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might help another family recognize warning signs and protect themselves from predators like Amira.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.